Welcome to Beyond the Reformer, the podcast where those who love Pilates come together for thoughtful conversations, genuine insights, and inspiring stories. I'm your host, Nick Lenny, and through these chats, I hope you feel more connected to our community, more aligned in your purpose, and inspired both in your Pilates journey and beyond. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Diane Nye, who is an educator for Polestar Pilates here in the UK. We talk in a lot of detail about teaching styles, and things that maybe aren't so helpful for our clients when we're teaching them, and ways that we can really enrich our teaching so that we can make changes that go deep. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Diane did not hold back. She shares so much of her wisdom. Hi, Diane. It is so amazing to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Nick. It's great to be here. I feel very honoured that you've asked me to join you.
Well, I could not ask you really, because I was doing the maths last night and thinking, when was it that I met you? And you know, when the numbers start to get quite big now because I'm old, but it was 15 years ago. When I did my Pilates training, my first training, it was with you and Liz. And so I've known you a very long time. You did my training. You've been my mentor throughout. I come back to you time and time and time again. And we always have these fantastic conversations, which is why I really wanted to have you on to the podcast. But it does feel very much a full circle moment to be back here. And now I'm interviewing you. So thank you so much for joining me. When did you first hear about Pilates and get involved with it?
Oh, goodness me. A long way back, early 1990s. And I was teaching fitness at the time. And we were always looking for new things to do, at the gyms and places we worked. We always wanted the next thing. It was weights, or it was some circuit class or something like that. And someone said, have you heard about Pilates? And I hadn't at the time. And there was this course, and I said, oh, well, I'll do it. I'll do anything. So I did. And I went and did the course, and I learned the basic mat repertoire. And that was it. It was one weekend. I learned the mat repertoire. And then I went to teach Pilates along with all the other things that I taught.
I know for you, you had some stuff going on in your body as well. Did even some of that initial one weekend course start to get you to think a bit differently about movement, or did that come later? Was there a journey in your own body that kind of took you somewhere?
That came much later. At the time, I went and did the course, and I literally wrenched and persuaded my body to go through the full mat repertoire. Couldn't do most of it, really, but I found a way. And at the time, I was quite fit and healthy in terms of the fact that I didn't have any injuries. But the injuries came later, so maybe that tells you something. But they did come along later, and it was at that point that I decided that I really did need to look into the way of how I was moving. And with the guidance of some other people it was an osteopath and another Pilates teacher who took me under their wings and started to teach me a lot more about movement. And we started using the studio equipment. And it was at that time I realized there was so much more to all of this. And I knew that I wanted to learn. I just knew I needed to know so much more, and I couldn't get enough of it, really. So I found out they trained with this company called Polestar. So I had never heard of Polestar, but at the time I went along and I did my training with Polestar. And then the real sort of learning started from that point onwards.
And was that the point really when you decided you were going to look at Pilates as a teacher versus the more general fitness? Or was there a time where you did a bit of both, even beyond the Polestar training?
Yeah, I did. I did both for some time because I'd been going for so long with the fitness. I felt that, I was enjoying it and I didn't really want to stop. So I kept it all going for some time until there came a point where they started to kind of interfere with each other. a little bit, both physically in terms of, you can't do sort of 500 squats a day, teaching classes like legs, bums, and tums, as it used to be at the time, and be balanced around your pelvis. There's no way. So I was very unbalanced at the time. And so, yeah, I had to sort of make that call. Really, do I need to be doing this kind of exercise? Actually, I'd like to go down a different route, going deeper actually into the Pilates work. And I left the fitness work behind. Yeah.
Is that the sort of point you opened your home studio? Or when did that come about?
That came about after I'd done the Polestar training. And I realized there was so much of it. So I decided to invest and buy my own equipment so I could practice at home. And I think it was the start of a lot of the decisions I've made in my career, which is I'm not doing it for my business or my clients. I'm actually doing it for me. I want this equipment at home because I'd like to work on it. I'd like to use it. And then I started teaching my clients on it as well. Before then, I used to do the go round to everyone's house thing, personal training and doing one-to-one Pilates. And at that point, I decided, well, I think everyone can come to me now and it will be so worth it because I've got this amazing equipment that they're going to love. And of course, they did.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because in some of the conversations I've been having, we've been talking about how Pilates is having this real moment at the moment. Like everyone knows what Pilates is, certainly reformer Pilates is. But back in when was this sort of 2003? I mean, I remember nobody even really knew what Pilates was. And certainly the equipment was just alien to people. So it must have been an interesting experience bringing people into your home and them seeing this slightly dodgy looking equipment.
Well, it was, no one had ever heard of it. They'd only really just about heard of mat Pilates. And when they saw the reformer and the trap table and the chair, I got all sorts of comments. People were actually quite scared of it when they looked at it, like, goodness me, what am I going to do with that? But yeah, it was interesting at that time.
And so you had your studio at home and but you were still teaching some classes, am I right, in the community, like in halls and things like that? Were you doing a mix?
Yeah, absolutely. I did group classes, quite a few group classes actually, out in the community. And then I would do my one-to-ones here. And I think at that time I started getting into small equipment a lot more because I realized the wonderful things I could be doing on the reformer or using springs from the trap table. And I had to start sort of adapting some of that so I could take it out to my groups by using, bands and balls and different things to try and replicate some of that.
I often say to people who are looking at different courses, the comprehensive course, even if you don't teach necessarily all of it, it gives you such a depth of knowledge that the comprehensively trained instructors are better mat teachers. They are better reformer teachers because their knowledge is deeper, but also, like you said, they're sort of stealing things and going, well, I want to teach you how this feels. And actually, we've got a band that could act a bit like that or a ball that could do something similar. It kind of gets you to understand where the props came from, really. So what took you from you've done your course, you've got your studio, you've got your clients, what took you from that into becoming the educator that you are today for Polestar?
Yeah, well, like most things, none of them were particularly orchestrated. I didn't start out thinking, oh, one day I want to be this Pilates educator or anything like that. I kind of see what happens as I go along. And I'd done the Polestar training and loved it and got right into it. And they very kindly asked me if I wanted to join their mentoring program and come back and assist on the courses, which, I was delighted to be able to go back and work with such, great people. So I started doing that. And it was during that time I saw and I admired so many other people teaching. And I knew that I didn't really have any of those skills. And I thought, goodness me, I really would love to learn more. So during that time, I started looking outside of Pilates to other genres of movement where I could expand my understanding of the moving body, which is what I did. And started working. I did courses with people like Gary Carter, who was wonderful, taught me a lot about the connectivity in the body, and Eric Franklin. I started going and doing workshops with him. And the things I was learning was so different and exciting, which I really loved. And it was around that time that Polestar then asked me if I wanted to become an educator and start teaching some of the courses, which spurred me on even more to really up my awareness and knowledge of, what was this moving body and how are we moving, and just knowing more about, well, everything, really. Of course, later on, I realized that I was never going to know everything about everything. And that's okay now. I sit well with that. There's too much to know. And that age old expression, the more you know, the less you kind of realize you do know. And that's fine, but yeah, I was so curious, and one thing led to the other, and I started dipping around all kinds of different courses like the Tom Myers anatomy trains and the structural integration, and upskilling with my hands-on skills with that. The myofascial release work came along with that.
Often a piece that's missing, isn't it, in people's they do the training, and I think not a lot of courses and the educators that they have get them to understand that you have to keep learning. The day you become a certified teacher is like day one of realizing you don't know very much, even though you're qualified. And I think you, as my, mentor, really spurred me on with that, because even in the time I've known you, the amount of knowledge that's come through that we didn't know when I did my course. A lot of the understanding of fascia didn't quite exist in the way that we now know it. What spurs you on to kind of learn? You've sort of talked about that, but also how do you tend to find, well, what should I look at? Because I think sometimes teachers are thinking, well, do I do more Pilates courses, or should I be looking at courses outside of Pilates? Like, how do we help guide people on how to expand their knowledge in a way that works for them?
That is such a tough question because, as you know, Nick, there's so much out there. And we can all go down, a different kind of rabbit hole and really become more of an expert in certain areas. Probably we're never going to be the expert in all areas. And I think I've jumped into that camp. I've dipped in and out of a lot of different things. So I have a good general knowledge, but maybe I'm not the absolute expert on all these different things. What I chose to do for myself was to try and look at so many different points of view, different ways of approaching movement. And I had to do this with such an open mind, because otherwise, and I see this in my education work, people love to hold on to their knowledge. But I was taught this. I was led to believe that. The book says this. And wouldn't life be simple if it was only ever just one thing and there was an absolute right or wrong? And of course, the truth is there just isn't. There's so many, possibilities. And so early on in my learning journey, I had to let go of holding on to knowledge and just look at things different ways, turn it upside down. What's it look like there? And when somebody said something very provocative, rather than becoming defensive around, oh, no, 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 that's not what we do, it was more about, goodness me, I had never thought of that. Let me consider and, chew that over a little bit. And can I see their point of view and what it is they're saying? So that went on a lot. And I think where you end up going on what courses you take is very much down to where your personal interest is taking you.
I think, like you said, it was your own journey, initially to your body couldn't do what it was doing before. Like, I think for me, that's such a great, let your body lead you and what works for you. And I think we're seeing more teachers niche down more because I think Pilates is getting so much bigger. You're seeing people doing work on hypermobility because they had hypermobility, or burnout because they had burnout, and they're kind of looking at the nervous system and things like that. So it is interesting to see that happening more. I try, and it's very much come from your sort of guidance to me, but I try and instill in the students from the beginning of their training, please learn to ask why. And when I suggest something, just as you said, what does that feel like in your body? Does it make sense what I'm saying? Or does it not make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, you're okay to ask why, because this isn't the gospel according to me. This is my journey of what I've discovered, like you, gone and done lots of trainings, and I'm here imparting my knowledge. But I want you to also be curious and to see how things feel. And like you said, look at things from different angles. I don't know if Eric Franklin did say this or didn't, but what I've always been told that he said something along the lines of, the body is just so beautifully complex. Why do we just try and make it so simple with these really basic, cues, when actually it's this whole system of integration? Something along those lines. He probably phrased it a lot better. But I wondered, you've, as an educator, you've worked with people. I predominantly work with people who are career changers who've never done any trainings, and you've had people like that, like me. You also work with a lot of people who come to Polestar. They're such a fantastic training, and you and Liz, who run the comprehensive, are so experienced, they're experienced teachers. They've been teaching a long time. They've done lots of trainings. And so I wonder what kind of things you come up at as these things that people hold on to so tightly. Are there kind of key myths or beliefs that people have that you see time and time again that cause good conversations? I'd love to discuss them.
It really goes back again to kind of what I was saying before about how we learn, and this idea that there is always a definitive right and wrong. Well, that would be lovely. And maybe in some things that we learn, there is right or wrong. There are facts, for sure. Anatomy kind of is anatomy, and you can't argue with that. But how we move, how we work as these sort of complex organisms, which is what we are. We're a living process. We're not objects. And that means by its very nature, we are complicated, for sure. And so there often isn't an exact, this is right, this is wrong. It's always that, well, it depends on what is your intention. What are you looking to achieve here? And then it might depend a little bit about what we consider to be maybe better or worse, or maybe, more efficient, say. That's a good word. Are we moving more efficiently or less efficiently? Are we moving more holistically as a whole rather than as sort of all these individual parts? And how the body integrates all of that together through the nervous system is quite a complex process. And unfortunately, a lot of methods, Pilates method included, has come on a sort of hand-me-down process from the man himself. And it's been handed down, handed down, handed down. And because of that, there are a lot of myths and a lot of, well, this is how we do it kind of approaches. And for some reason, people don't question it. Some people do, for sure. I question everything, but not everyone does. So we're taught things and we just accept that. Yes, okay, the teacher said it's this. We believe it. Okay, we're kind of conditioned to do that in learning. From when we were at school, we were told, listen to the teacher, and what the teacher says is right. But actually, things are not always right. We could argue points about things. I think we've just got to open our minds to other possibilities. Is it always this, or could it be different? I always say to people, if someone says to me, yes, but I was told, I said, well, you could do it like that. But if you do it like that, the consequence is X, Y, or Z. However, you could do it differently. and not have to have that consequence. The consequence would be something different. So I'll give you an example here. As a body, we are, absolutely amazing at compensating. That's what the body does. Okay. We are hardwired to sort of meet gravity and not fall over, essentially. So the body does whatever it takes to keep us in that line of gravity, however which way it can. And if we all know the ideal, way, if we were just standing up, the ideal way would be to meet that line of gravity. And we know we kind of got this central axis, and if we meet that, then that would be the most efficient or ideal way and the least amount of work for the body to do. However, life is life. Posture is posture. A million things we do in life take us away from the ideal. So we all end up somewhere away from that in, various degrees, shall we say. And we're still going to meet gravity and we're still going to achieve the tasks we need to achieve. So the body's going to figure out how to compensate around being able to do that. The amazing nervous systems that we have can just figure it all out, which is great. But they're not always great if we've overly compensated. And then we start to become unstable, things start to give. We feel that as discomfort, tension, pain, wherever we are on that scale. The way I looked at this personally was if someone's in that place of compensation, does it make it right then to lay them down and ask them to hold their body in a different position, almost adding a compensation to all the compensations they were already doing? Because that is right. Okay, we always lay down, we have our arms by our sides, and we've got our shoulders open, and we need the pelvis in exactly this position and the legs in exactly this alignment. Does that make it right? Is that natural to anybody? And I thought, goodness me, what am I doing here?
So this is the idea that, someone lies down and you move their head and you move their feet but where they think they are is the middle, but you going in and sort of correcting them doesn't actually help them because what it does is create more tension and compensatory patterns. So how
Absolutely.
do you help someone find that better balance in their body?
There's a certain amount of unraveling that's got to go on before we can then start to rebuild. If the system has held on to a lot of things and that's become the normal, the unconscious behavior of the system, then we've got to somehow unravel some of that, unwind some of that to find a better place of neutrality. Now, when I say neutral, I don't mean an exact idea of, well, we have to be in these exact positions. It's like, where's your neutrality? That's going to be unique, actually. Once we found that level of neutrality, and the way I get there is with all my wonderful props and small equipment, which, goes back to my work with the Franklin method that I've done a lot of and other genres. If we can kind of unwind and unravel and find a place where our bones can just kind of drop and land. The lady that really brought this to my attention was Liz Cook, who wrote books on the psoas and the core, but not how maybe most people think it is. But anyway, this idea that if we can then find the ground and let our bones just land, then we're in a place then to kind of rebuild the system in a more balanced way.
From the day I met you, I think that it was that approach that changed so much for me in so many things. I think it is still a piece in all movement that is missing. I don't see many studios that you go to a class and there is some unraveling. The fitness industry, over, and I know there's, me and Claire Sparrow had a great chat about we're really professionals, not the fitness industry. There is a difference in, the trainings that we've done. I think it's such a good point. But I think that unraveling piece, anything that is remotely fitness, there seems to be quite a desire to, well, it must be harder to be doing me any good. And it can feel quite uncomfortable for people sometimes, can't it? I mean, I remember vividly. So when I was doing my training, I was still marketing in marketing world, and I would usually have created a meeting in London. So I would pay my travel, and then I would come to you, and I'd come to you pent up with energy. I'd been, all this stuff in the morning. And I remember lying down and it felt like we were doing nothing really, breathing, unraveling. And I remember thinking, what a waste of money. I'm doing nothing. I need to learn all this repertoire. I'm doing nothing. And I remember one day you said to me, Nick, I can't do anything with you until we come back from this place. But my style of teaching is very inspired from that because actually I realized through that work how much change happened in my body, not just from feeling good, but the thing that blows my mind is still to this day. There's something about my body, and I don't think I'm unique in this, is that when I push my body, it pushes me back. It does not like it. When I kind of roll around on a ball and don't feel like I'm doing very much, not only does my body feel better, but I also start to see the physical changes maybe that I'm trying to get from the pushing. And we'll talk in a moment about the fact that Pilates is unregulated. And there's a real range of what Pilates is these days. It's not that anything is right or wrong, it's just that there's differences. But the big difference at the moment is this desire, isn't it, towards the beast yourself, which there's nothing wrong with pushing yourself, but what I've always loved about working with you is that unraveling piece. You need to do that before you can then, like you said, build on that. And I guess that's why, if I look back at all the times I did boot camps and all that kind of stuff that was big when I first started movement, no wonder my posture didn't improve. That's your point, right? No wonder I didn't really see the physical changes because I was just adding more tension into a system that was already under imbalance. Would that make sense?
Yeah, it brings up a really good point, Nick. And it goes back to what I said before, as in what is your intention here? Because I am never going to put down, strong exercise. I mean, I was the one leaping up and down for hours on end for years. And I loved it, So there's nothing wrong with that. If you love to run, if you like to push weights, if you like to really up your system and get that feel good factor from it, then that is amazing and fantastic. Okay. And here comes the but. I realized long ago that if you do that and you have a super, super busy life and you're always rushing around and doing, you end up in what we might call sympathetic overload, which is you're high in your sympathetic nervous system. And you never really come down, not even in your sleep, because you're probably still grinding your teeth away all night and your brain is never quite switching off or dropping down. And you live like that. And a lot of people do live this way. I know I did in the past. It becomes your normal. So you go along with that. And then people say things to me like, yes, but this is just how I am. This is me, and that's lovely. And you can keep living like that until one day, and it will come in some shape or form, your body is going to rebel. Now, all kinds of things could go on, but something is going to say, no, 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 no more. Because we were not designed to live in this way, for sure. We need balance in our lives. We need to go up there, but then we need to come down here. And somewhere in the middle, we would call that balance. And of course, what we do is we kind of go up and down from that middle. Now, that's great. And if we can find that balance in life, fantastic. But when it comes to making meaningful change, so if you want to change how your body aligns, how your body sets itself up in the nervous system, because remember, this is all in the autonomic nervous system. It's unconscious control. When you walk down the road, you're not telling every muscle what to do. It's happening. If you're pushing, and you're doing exercises that are all very hard, you're basically putting yourself in a place where you're up against it. And what the body becomes there is defensive. it's defending itself. It's up against some force here, some challenge, and it's going to defend itself. And that is a fight or flight sympathetic response for sure. And that is where the body will survive. Of course it will. It will up its game, absolutely. But that's not the place where any change is going to happen. There's nothing restorative about that. That is pushing it to its limits, and it will defend itself as it needs to. So if we want to make these changes, we've got to drop down the other way. And the word I'm going to use is safe. Deep, deep in your system, your body has to feel safe. And when it does feel safe, it will let go. And then it can start to rebuild, work out different patterning, different habits start to form, and we can make really, really meaningful change. But we can only make that change in that place. And I'm not saying you're going to stay in that place all day. I mean, goodness me, you'd never get anything done. But you've got to go to that place to start that journey of awareness, of actually starting to sense yourself. You know, when everything's going fast, it's all very noisy and loud. You don't feel things there. You don't sense things too much. But you bring it down and you start to notice yourself and what you're doing and how you're doing it, and actually start to experience yourself out of your sort of controlling thinking brain and more into the part of you that kind of knows it. It does know it. You just haven't been there yet. You know, if anyone's thinking, what's she on about? Well, you've got to try and enter this place and then you'll know.
It sounds like your sort of experience with movement, and it's been mine because I guess you were my teacher, but also I had other teachers who had similar approaches. I feel really lucky that I came across that. And I remember a teacher years ago saying, most people just live from the neck up, but most of us is from the neck down. And it's a whole system of communication. And yet we never listen or tune in. And Pilates is this amazing opportunity to get you to slow down, to tune in, to feel, to notice. How do we do that in a class? I know that you are big in terms of cueing. How do we use our words and even, I guess, our exercise selection to help tap into this? Because the things that you're talking about are so much deeper than, toning a bicep. My studio is called Soul Pilates. It's because for me, I kind of through this work just discovered who I am and what I'm about. And that might sound a bit wanky, but it really was that deep for me. That's kind of where I went. How do teachers do that? How do you help inspire them to do that?
It is hard because so many teachers say to me, oh, I really get it, Diane, and I love what you're doing. But my clients, they all want to work out, they all want this and that, and they don't pay attention and they just want to sort of move through the exercises. And it's only because really that's what they've been trained to do. That's what they've got used to doing. And they kind of don't know any different from that. You can't suddenly go from doing something that's very sort of high energy and fast paced to something where you're hardly moving or doing anything. Or, Nick, we get the response that you had where you're lying there thinking, what am I doing? Why am I even here? We're not doing anything,
Yeah.
So what helped me get people more into this sort of mind frame is the work I've done with the Franklin method with the imagery, and the work I've done with Liz Cook with the awareness of oneself, and then trying to get people to just come inside and notice a few things. So I often guide people through their body and they go on this little journey through themselves and they're noticing what is rather than trying to make themselves anything in particular. You get the difference. I'm not saying you've got to have two shoulders that are the same. I'm saying notice your shoulders and notice what the differences are. What are the differences? Is one bigger or smaller or higher or lower or heavier or lighter? How do you sense it? It's getting people interested in themselves to be able to then get so engrossed. And what I noticed when I started doing this and got better at it, I'd get to the end of the class and people would say, no, 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 that's never an hour. That's never an hour. I'm like, yeah, we've had an hour. Because once they came in, time kind of stands still. It's of no consequence. But that busy person who can't slow down, who's sitting there checking their watch or their phone, for them, it's almost like, oh, come on, come on, come on. It seems like they're too busy for all of that.
So interesting, isn't it? Because I think Pilates really appeals to those busy minded people because it's not too woo woo. Because the too woo woo would be, oh no, we don't go over there. It's scientific. Pilates has lots of science around it. And it's that interesting balance, like you said. I think if you go too deep with this too quickly with certain people, you're going to alienate them. They're not going to get it. You have to meet them where they're at and try and sprinkle this in. And like you said, use it in your cueing. How would it feel if you did this? Notice this, get them to start, like I said, get out of their head and just thinking about and noticing and feeling into their bodies. And I guess back to what you were saying before, they're going to also maybe start to feel their own imbalances, perhaps. Oh, actually, I didn't really ever tune into my pelvis before and notice that my left side is dropping lower than my right. And I'm imagining through that awareness, when you then add in some of the Pilates repertoire that we all know and love, you bring that into that awareness and it just lands so much deeper. A pelvic clock for me is like, it's so deep for people. It's an amazing movement. It's such a basic movement. But, for example, that awareness taken into such a simplistic movement in some senses can feel really deep. But you can take that approach anywhere, I guess.
Well, you can. And that person who is very unaware might do a nice integrated exercise, like a spine stretch or a seated push through if you were on the trap table, where everything's moving in the body. That person who was unaware would do it and think, oh, yeah, that was quite nice, maybe, if they enjoyed it. But the person who was very aware might do some of these movements and then sit or stand or lie down and think, wow, I feel very different now. That has made a real difference. I notice now my pelvis is much more balanced and my shoulders are more balanced with my pelvis. And my neck, my head's in a different place now, and they start noticing all these lovely differences that essentially, the body came up with. The body heals itself. This is the thing people don't realize. And if we can learn to move well, we can heal from within and improve and improve. And then we never stop improving. We can always improve some more. And so it becomes quite addictive, actually, to keep wanting to sense and feel these improvements that are so positive.
But the noticing is really important, right? Because if you don't notice, it almost doesn't matter what you've done because you haven't picked up the information. Am I right?
Exactly. Then you're just in that place. Oh yeah, I quite enjoyed that. That was nice. You don't realize the effect it's having. And actually, if you can't notice it too much, it probably doesn't have much of an effect because it's not really landing at a cortical level in the brain. It's very superficial.
Where do you stand? It's a conversation that comes up for me a lot in my trainings on the cues that are things like engage your core, engage your glutes, this kind of conscious engagement. You talked earlier about, when you're walking down the street, how you're just doing it, without thinking. I guess for me, I'm often thinking, well, why, if I'm trying to teach someone do that better, I need to take them out of the conscious piece, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh goodness. I mean, I, like most people, started, learning exercise and teaching exercise. And this is just what we said. We almost had to tell every muscle how to work, it seemed. And that was great. In my early years of teaching, I blindly followed along, with everyone else. And it was only when people started to challenge that and I started to listen to what they were saying and challenged it myself and realized how ridiculous is this really? Why on earth, when we've got this amazing system that, you don't tell a small child how to stand up and meet gravity, they instinctively know it. Our bodies instinctively know how to perform. If only we'd get out the way of ourselves. And this is the big thing. We've kind of orchestrated it such that we then get right in the way of how the body really knows how to work. And then we're in trouble. Because as we know, if you start engaging your core, whatever you believe that to be, and that's a whole, goodness me, we could discuss that for the next hour. What do we mean by this? Basically, you're going to pull some stuff in the middle, okay? It's blocking. You're basically saying to this lovely connection that's coming down through your spine, from your head to your tail, I don't want you anymore. I'm just going to block it all in, hold it all in like I've got a big corset around the middle, and cut the upper body off from the lower body. And that'll be great because I'm supposedly stable. But of course, it's the polar opposite. The way we find stability is through balance. And balance is tiny adjustments, corrections. That's how the body balances itself. And it doesn't balance itself by becoming rigid and still. And it goes back to this idea we're not objects, we are living and breathing. Now, of course, if you put everything in the middle, that's one thing you're going to scupper, is the whole breathing mechanism, because of course the diaphragm can't fully descend. So you're going to push the breathing up into, more of the sympathetic response. You're going to prevent fluids flowing within you. No one ever considers what's inside of their body. It's just as important of what's on the outside. And as we move, what's inside our body is moving with us. But if we block or inhibit that in some way, then we stop those fluids. Now, one thing I love when I teach people to let go is the moment I hear the gurgle. Soon as I hear that tummy gurgle, I think, yes, we're on our way. And that's the fluid starting to flow again. Because when we're holding all that tension, we are just inhibiting it so much. And it's hardly surprising that maybe our digestive system is rather sluggish or we're getting complications elsewhere. These fluids have to flow up and down us. All of our system has to communicate from top to bottom. And everything being codependent on everything else is in this wonderful state of balance. Why on earth would we want to get in the way of any of that?
And it's interesting when you explain this, and people will say, teachers at my studios, students will say to me, do you ever teach the word engage? I said, never. Like, just, it's never ever taught. And then they feel when they come to teach or do a demo that like all their language has been taken away from them, which is interesting. I just find it fascinating for me that we were talking about this 15 years ago. And I explain it to my students. I also say, this isn't a school of Pilates saying this. This is trainings that I've done as you have on anatomy, on how the body moves. All the top people in movement across all movement are agreed on this. However, there are people coming out of training schools today still with the script of you must say this or they're not doing it. That's quite frustrating when there really is the knowledge that that isn't helpful. Why do you think they're doing that still?
Because it's simple and it's easy. And in life today, most people want a quick fix.
Or a quick
It's,
course and a quick qualification, I guess.
I'm going to teach Pilates. So give me the information, package it up nice and simply, and then I can take that and go off and start teaching. And it is oh so simple just to say these things.
There's quite a few of them, aren't there? There's the engage your core, engage your glutes. The other one I get is, and I think coming from someone who had a big shoulder and neck problem, is shoulders down when your arms go up. And I remember me having a big conversation about, well, if you understand the anatomy, that isn't what happens. And that's why the anatomy training is so important. You need to understand what's happening so you can cue it in a way that supports it.
You see, even if you know anatomy, and this is one of my big things, like, well, I've got many big things, as you know, but I rant on about all sorts. The problem with anatomy is that you look at pictures in the anatomy books, and they're all two-dimensional. And they've been drawn. And weirdly enough, and this is the way of the world, and I find it astonishing, most of these pictures go back hundreds of years, in fact. It was the early anatomists that drew these pictures then when they started dissecting bodies. They're sort of literally how the bones might look, say, when laid on a flat surface kind of thing. And they're not true of the body that is three-dimensional and standing in the line of gravity. It's a complete illusion as to things like how the pelvis is. I mean, the pelvis is a big one because all anatomy models of the pelvis are male pelvises, which are very different from a female pelvis, which is more open, wider. And they all look like, how many people use the cue, imagine your pelvis is like a bowl. If you were standing up and your pelvis was a bowl, then, the water's coming in at the top. The truth is, if your pelvis was a bowl full of water in its anatomical position, the water would all be pouring out the front because we know the pelvis sits in an anterior position. So it balances on the legs. But people have been so blindsided by these anatomy pictures. I see really well qualified people still looking at someone standing and wanting them to essentially posteriorly tuck their pelvis, which messes everything up. You've messed all your connections, force absorption, all that, lovely, the beautiful way the body is orchestrated and balanced. You messed the whole lot up by doing a simple thing like tucking your tail under because you didn't like the fact that you had a lordosis in your lower back, which might not have come from the pelvis anyway. When I look at people with excessive lordosis, it's often because the rib cage is flaring out the front, and that's what's creating it. But the classic compensation is to tuck that pelvis. It's very frustrating because it's like people don't see it for what it is. They just look at those pictures and that's the image they have. And therefore, that's what they see when they're moving their body. They see it kind of differently, which isn't so much the truth.
I feel like the more trainings I go on, the more I come away and think, actually, it's quite a simplistic view of a complicated structure in that everything is connected and try and help everything find balance, and you will inevitably help the bit that feels unbalanced. I had this conversation with a student yesterday. They're saying, so someone comes in and they have knee pain. You're saying that the whole session isn't dedicated to the knee? And I was like, no, because who knows why the knee is in pain? Yes, you're going to keep your eye on on the knee. You're going to see how it's moving, but you've got to take a full body approach. I think one of the things that Pilates is so good at, more than a lot of other things, it's a full body approach. And so people have these amazing sort of transformations from, being in pain and feeling a certain way, because really in its essence it is about, let's get everything feeling more balanced, more connected, your nervous system calms down. The change you see in people, I mean, it blew my mind when I first opened my studio, I have to say. People with big complex histories of pain saying things to me like, the only night I don't wake up in pain screaming is the night I've been to Pilates. And you're like, "Oh, okay, I'm not really doing anything that amazing. I'm just following the principles and helping your body, move."
Exactly. This is what I discovered years ago before I even had any of this, the awareness about the body, is that I was watching people move, doing, things I'd learned in the Pilates repertoire on the equipment. And like you say, they were improving all kinds of things. And I was thinking, goodness me, we haven't even worked on that part. But that part is now feeling so much better. And of course, some years later, I realized why, of course, and it's because we're working with the whole. And you really can't go too far wrong if you treat the body as a whole and move it as a whole, connected structure. And I think a lot of the time, this is where, medicine falls down in a way because it's all so fragmented. And if you've got a knee problem, people only look at your knee because that's where the problem is. But, there's a saying these days, which is where it hurts is not why it hurts. And that's so, so often the truth. That knee problem could be to do with something happening much higher in the body. And you know what the good news is that you don't need some amazing anatomical knowledge to try and sort of, in a complicated way, figure that out. All you've got to do is get the body moving as a whole. It's going to sort itself out. It's the self-healing that the body does. You just need the right environment for it to be able to happen. And that's hopefully what we create, an environment where the body can reorganize itself and find balance within itself without us holding it in any position at all. No, no, no. It holds itself, without engaging any muscles. No, they do it. They do it according to gravity, force, alignment, all of these things. It's all happening.
When you turn something on 100% or 50% or 60%, who knows what you're doing when you engage anything? You're not teaching your body to do just as much as it needs. Whereas, helping people find that balance is going to do that. I'd like to take you back to your role as an educator for Polestar Pilates. How have you seen things sort of change in the time that you've been there, the Pilates world? Have you seen much difference in what's out there and what's coming into you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess it's always moving forwards. The general sort of vibe is much more in that holistic place, more than the kind of more fitness styled place of Pilates, which maybe it once was, even from the classical approach that came from the dance background, where there was a lot more doing, shall we say. I can only speak for Polestar, but it's much more about the whole body holistic approach now. And, even this year, they're changing some of their principles around that because, this idea of engaging core and things like that is so old hat. It's looking more at the whole person, which they always did, but it's going even more down that road. And complementary therapies around that as well are coming in an awful lot more. I think we use a lot more small equipment than we ever did. All kinds of things have come along, like OOVs and spine fitters and every kind of small ball and gadget. And that comes very much into the work we're doing in the studio as well.
It's interesting hearing you talk about, from your work within Polestar, almost more holistic coming in. And for me, certainly, I think that Pilates is often people's first dip into the holistic world. And we as teachers, often we go on our own, like you said, things happen in our own body and we're like, oh, I'll try this and I'll try this. And, and then we can help guide clients when they say something. And I often feel like we're the first holistic piece, like you said about the medical world. I mean, they're great. I've got GP friends who agree with me on this. They're great at anything acute. They don't do so well with the chronic problems because chronic problems is an imbalance often in your life. And that's complicated because if I wrote a book and you wrote a book on the way, it would not be the way for each other. And that's what's hard about holistic health, isn't it? Is that there's no one size fits all and it's a trial and error for every person. But it's really interesting hearing that Polestar and your work with them is going even deeper into that. And I'm not surprised because they were doing this 15 years ago when I worked with them. But the boom that's out there in the studios that are opening is kind of not that at all, really. A big part of the boom is can we make it the heaviest or the lightest spring to make it harder? A lot of lunges, a lot of squats. And like we both said, I go to those studios. I enjoy them. I enjoy them for what they are because I know what I'm going to, and I have enough knowledge of my body, hopefully, to do it quite well. Although I can't help myself sometimes when I'm in those studios seeing someone struggling, I want to just kind of whisper and go, just put the blue spring on and you're going to be able to do this a lot better. But it's really interesting kind of seeing that. And I guess it's a challenge, isn't it, for clients and for people coming in to do their teacher training to truly understand that range that exists in Pilates of the different styles and to understand what studio they might, go to and to understand really that if they go to a studio and it's not anything that we're talking about, just try something different. Or if you're really not enjoying what we're talking about, there's also some stuff that's going to really push you and get you a sweat. But the same for teacher training. There is no official body, there's no official accreditation. And it's hard, isn't it, for people to truly know where to invest their time and money in and to understand the difference of working someone like Polestar, where you're a year to 2 years, maybe more, doing that course if it's comprehensive versus a few weekends. It's tricky. Do you see that with people coming through the education program?
Absolutely, very much so. I think that it comes down to what is it you want? It's just like going to those, reformer classes, which are really just like a kind of gym workout on a reformer. I see it like that. It's really just about reps and pumping the body up as much as you can, and using strategies around that. And if that's what people are coming for and they're enjoying that, fair enough. You could go to the gym and do it, or you can go and on a reformer and do it. I think the problem comes where people have been maybe, you know, advised to do Pilates by their therapist or their doctor because it's supposed to, balance you, and maybe they've had some issues with their body and they're looking to reorganize. And as we've already talked about, you're not going to be reorganizing doing that. There might be short-term gain in some strength. So, often people do think, oh, yeah, I feel a bit better for doing this, which is great. But long term, is it going to change anything? Probably not. So, from the client point of view, it's really your choice. What are you enjoying? Or what do you need? I mean, I don't think many people ask themselves that question. What do I need?
I don't think they know, do they? They're in pain often, and I'm with you on that. I think the boom in Pilates where people are now coming to it not because they're in pain, but because they like the benefits of it. Fine, go wherever you want. You're going to have a great time, whatever studio. But you're absolutely right. The people who get recommended it, that was me. My life wouldn't have been changed from that style. It just wouldn't have been. I wouldn't have seen the benefits. I would have just come up against myself and I wouldn't certainly have gone on this journey. But it's hard, isn't it? If you go and try that and you don't understand that there's a range of styles. I mean, the yoga world has, I guess, tried to do this with creating some names for the styles. So at least you've got a sense of what you're going for. Whereas Reformer Pilates, as an example, is just Reformer Pilates. And so that person might go, their back pain might be significantly worse. And then their narrative is, I tried Pilates, it was rubbish, didn't enjoy it. And it's interesting how we can, I try this in our marketing as well at the studio. How do we try and educate people that there is a difference? And so you have a choice in what resonates with you and what you want really to go and do that. But it's interesting that you're seeing that even with the students coming through now. I guess as Pilates has got more popular, you might be seeing more students come through. I certainly have this where people are like, I want to be a Pilates teacher. How much Pilates have you done? Yeah, none. Yeah. You need to go and do some.
We get a lot of that. And I would say to anyone who is considering a career as a Pilates teacher, it's like, what kind of teacher do you want to be? Do you want to just, maybe work in a studio and teach 5, 6, 7 reformer classes a day, roll them out, bit like I used to do jumping up and down in a gym, teaching group exercise classes. And if that's what you want to do, then that's fair enough. You could probably go and do some training that was quite minimal that would teach you those exercises and a few skills around how to deliver the teaching of them, and you could do that. If, however, you're wanting more skills, if you're wanting to work one-to-one with people, if you're wanting to help people to make a difference in their lives, well, that's something quite different. And you have to understand that that's going to take an amount of time and an amount of training. And actually, even after doing a more comprehensive kind of training, even then, you finish your training, you're still a rookie. To get to any level of expertise, you're going to add on another 10 years of practice before you're entering that field, before you've developed the skills. And how do we develop any skills? We develop them through practice. We have to do it. We have to figure stuff out. Oh, this works better. That works better. Not for this person. Yes, for that person. And the communication skills that we have to develop around that. And of course, it never stops. We keep going and developing as a teacher over the years.
The students that we have really get this because I share this with them. It's like the day you pass your driving test and you get into the car and you're like, oh God, I've got to drive now. And technically it's the same, isn't it? When you've got your certification, you can teach, but suddenly you're met with the real public with all their stuff. It's a whole new learning thing. And I think the thing I find interesting is the students that we've had are very used to feedback and support in that way. But sometimes when we get people from other training schools, they think they're being critiqued and they've done something wrong. And it's like, no, 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 no. It's like, you're now the apprentice and we're here. We want to support you with being the best you can be. And that means we will come along to classes and we will feedback and say, this could have flowed better, or you could have played a bit more around with this, or we have conversations on engage your core, a lot of conversations on that. So it's interesting to hear you say that. To end our conversation today, I've been asking everyone in this series the same questions, a series of little short, quick fire questions. The first one, Diane, is what was the most influential piece of advice you've been given and by who?
Oh my goodness, that's a big one. I have been given so much good advice over the years. And of course, when you look back, there's so many people who made a big impact on your teaching. But I think the first person to really influence me in the style of teaching or going towards the style of teaching I do today was my teacher when I first went to Polestar, which was Alistair Greetham. Alistair's such a lovely man and so wise and so knowledgeable and this is going back over 20 years, the things he was talking about that we talk about today, he was talking about it then. And people were almost outraged to hear some of these things because it so went against their models or their ideas. And what he really taught me was to just have the courage of your convictions and be able to stand your ground and trust in your knowledge. Because before that, I was the big, imposter syndrome person. Oh, but I don't know enough. And but who's going to want to listen to me? And he said, you know what, Diane, you have a great amount of knowledge. You need to believe it and trust in what you know.
Such a straight talking person. It's so refreshing, isn't it? I've met him a few times. I've had a couple of sessions with him and they stood out for me. And similarly, I now know enough to know that I think my nervous system was having a bit of a response where I kind of walked away from the session. And he knows this. I've told him again, I hated that. Just, and to this day, I relay the teachings from those sessions because it's so good. But it took me some time to process it, to get through it. But I still think of the things he taught me in those sessions.
You know, the thing that really sticks with me was something Eric Franklin said to me a few years ago. And I was, in full excitement mode about talking about all kinds of detail. And he was giving me critique on my teachings. And he said, Diane, he said, that was wonderful. He said, but you need to be brave enough to withhold some information. And that really stuck with me because I thought, my goodness, of course, I can't share everything. I can't teach everything I know about any one thing in one go. But that excitement and that sort of eagerness to share.
Oh, I mean, I remember when you first become part of this world and you see the changes it makes for people, you can't help but be a bit of a preacher to people. Like, this is what you need to do. And of course, they back away then. So he's absolutely right, isn't it? You sort of have to just not share everything and let people come to it in their own time. If you could
Yeah.
go back in time, Diane, and give your younger self some advice, what would it be?
I would say trust in yourself, follow your heart more than your head. Because we always think, the head, I was a big procrastinator. I'd always be weighing stuff up. Should I, shouldn't I? Is it worth it? Blah, de, blah. But what I've learned in recent years is it's kind of that knowing, you know it. You do know it, really.
But part of this work, like you were saying, that tuning into yourself is that you also can't help but tune into your inner knowing, that gut feeling. We know what we should be doing. We know the choices we should be making, but often we have, like you said earlier, so much getting in the way. And that's why Pilates, this is what I just love about it, through the method of it, how deep you can go with this, even in just a group class. Which leads me into my last question. What is the most profound gift that Pilates has given you?
The most profound gift is presence, actually, is presence in myself. Being able to sit with myself and feel very, very content with that, and be able to trust myself in what I'm doing and have that sense of it's okay. Even when we make mistakes, which we all do, knowing that, okay, I made a mistake, that's okay. And that kind of inner trust, inner knowing is something I certainly didn't have many years ago. And Pilates has really taught me by understanding myself within my own body, that has given me that ability to sit very, very comfortably just with me.
It goes back to what you said earlier, doesn't it? About that, the need sometimes people have for the right and the wrong. And you've started to understand that there isn't really a right and a wrong. There's just a feeling and what feels good. And that, again, that's the movement, how that idea with the movement has sort of gone into your life in a deeper way, into the way that you trust yourself. Diane, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your thoughts. As always, it is so wonderful to chat to you. I know so many people will get so much out of you sharing all your wisdom. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.